Welcome, everyone. My name is Tristan Claridge, and I'm the convener of this webinar series for the International Social Capital Association. The association's mission is to advance the research and application of the social capital concept, and we're welcoming new members. And in fact, we're going to hold a big international conference in Dubai next year with keynote speakers, including Professor Robert Putnam. In this session, we welcome Shelley Doyle for a presentation titled Leading with Social Wealth, Relational Design for the Future of Work. Shelley is a social wealth strategist, podcaster, and an international master's student at Royal Roads University. She brings more than 20 years of experience in communications, having led internal and purpose-driven campaigns across the UK, Europe, and Australia. Now, she focuses her work on guiding remote leaders and distributed teams through research-based workshops and programs that help them intentionally design social wealth into their hybrid lives, fostering strong connections and long-term social health. Shelley's current research explores the practical strategies leaders can use to feel more connected, trusted, and supported, whether online or offline. We're delighted you've agreed to give this webinar. Welcome, Shelley, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Tristan. Thank you, everyone who's dialed in live. Good afternoon from Victoria, British Columbia. Before I begin, I would just like to do a land acknowledgement, which is something that is very common here in Canada, and I understand is quite common in other areas around the world. So I'm presenting this research from the traditional lands of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, lands I've had the very big privilege of living, working, and studying on since moving to Canada in 2021. I offer my deep gratitude to the stewards of this land, past and present. I would also like to extend my sincere thanks to my supervisors who might watch this down the line, Dr. Deb Linen and Dr. Julian Miraval, and also to my corporate research partner, which was Sun Life Canada, of which 1,218 people took the time to come back to my survey, and over 13 leaders generously shared their time and their truths with me, often vulnerably, about what it means to be connected or disconnected in this new remote and hybrid world. So thank you to those, and let's get into it. Okay, so why did I start doing this research? Well, it turns out from 1986 to 2022, the percentage of Canadians seeing friends on a typical day dropped from 48% to 19%. So this does reflect a rising reliance on digital communications and really deeper shifts in how our social relationships are formed and sustained today. This shift to remote and hybrid work brought with it so many benefits to us. It gave us greater flexibility and autonomy and fewer commutes. But what often goes unspoken is what we lost. And that was the daily rhythms and informal interactions that once energized us to be able to do our best work. And this matters. Because research showed that digital interactions, whilst they are very convenient, they don't fully replicate the physiological and psychological benefits of in-person connection. And the effects are significant, with 65% of remote workers in the US reporting loneliness. And senior leaders in particular facing unique social burdens. So often the ones expected to help us foster connections can often be feeling the most isolated themselves. And according to Cigna, loneliness costs businesses approximately $4,200 annually per year in lost absenteeism and lost productivity. That's per lonely employee annually. So so absenteeism and then presenteeism when they're present but perhaps not engaged. And that figure is based on average salaries, not leadership wages. And yet, this loneliness remains largely invisible within professional settings. It's rarely named, kind of stigmatized. So we really wanted to unpack this to understand what those root causes are, so that we can help people to feel happier and healthier in their working lives. Just that cost again, that 4,200 figure, if we really look at what this means to employers, to businesses, based on 1,000 employees, that's a potential cost to the business of over $1.3 million per year. So now imagine your organization has 50,000 employees. In June, so just before I published my thesis, just as I was kind of wrapping up, the World Health Organization launched its first report on social connection, declaring it as a global health priority and actually positioning it as a third pillar of health, as vital to countries and businesses as physical and mental health. So I believe that social health is to become the next big industry, and leaders who understand it early will really help to shape the future of healthy workplaces. So the research question that I set out to explore: how do remote and hybrid people leaders in Canada experience social well-being, and how do their efforts to activate, maintain, or even neglect their relationships impact their social wealth? We'll go into that terminology in just a moment. And these are the research objectives that I explored: to examine the presence and impact of loneliness, to assess the extent to which social needs are met, and to identify the distinct features that characterize social wealth so that we can really help leaders to strive towards it. So in my research, I drew from three concepts. So loneliness, a natural emotion that arises when there's a gap between desired and actual connection, not just about being alone, but feeling disconnected from valued relationships or groups, even when they might be present. And social well-being, so this represents a state in which individuals' social needs are met. They feel connected and supported. According to Corey Keyes, there are 5 variables to this feeling: social integration, when we're feeling part of groups or networks; social acceptance, when we're trusting ourselves and others; social contribution, where we have belief in our value to others; and social actualization, optimism regarding our own and society's potential for positive change; and social coherence, feeling as though we understand the social world around us and our place within it. Social well-being is holistic. So if someone feels isolated from their community or lacks self-acceptance, they may well bring this into the workplace, and vice versa. And a person can appear connected, yet really experience a lack of meaning or security in their relationships. And then social wealth. So initially, what I was presenting was really a subjective internal state rooted in trust, support, and consistent value exchange. Towards the end of this presentation, I'll kind of let you know where I've gotten to with social wealth. So some of the highlights from my literature review: obviously social capital was one of the biggest ones, really getting my head around this. And actually in November, I was lucky enough to go to the Human Connection Conference in Vancouver, put on by Genwell. So I was not only presenting my research plan as a poster competition, but we also had a screening of the documentary around Robert Putnam's book and his work. So that was a really great deep dive beneath the book that I'd already kind of got my hands on and was kind of getting my head around. So I'm sure if everyone's here, you kind of got a decent understanding of social capital. And yeah, one of the big insights that I saw was in 1999, Nan Lin predicted a revolutionary rise in social capital driven by technology. And that came 4 years before LinkedIn and 5 years before Facebook. And yet, with unprecedented access to our social capital, with our former colleagues, friends, cohorts, communities, loneliness continues to rise. And this is where I started to get a deeper understanding of where social wealth comes into play. So really as the activation or utility of our social capital. In my literature review, I explored the impact of remote and hybrid working and how it can lead to Zoom fatigue. There was a statistic about some remote workers being on screens for 13 hours a day if they were working for 7 hours on the screen and then 3 hours on social media and another 3 hours on the TV. So those hours can really add up. So it's probably no wonder that we're not doing video calls with family members too much outside of this. I started looking at the importance of environments outside of the home and the workplace, these environments called third places where people gather voluntarily for relaxation, conversation, and community. I also explored the rising trend of fourth spaces. So these are like third places, but digital environments that allow us to share experiences and bring people together despite limited physical interaction. I then looked at innovative social connection strategies, predominantly of remote first organizations who have clear restraints or constraints. So some of the examples that I explored included Atlassian. They fund Atlassian on tour pop-up style events. So colleagues that work in non-office locations are funded to put on local events so they can come together more regularly. Zapier, they realized that speaking up can be much harder when working remotely. So they came up with the idea of teams choosing a safe word. So when they want to flag a concern about a project, one of the words they chose was pomegranate. So it was like pomegranate, everyone get ready. I'm going to say something that might not be too popular. So finding ways when that physical connection doesn't break the ice and allow things to happen more easily. Um, Office mandates, we know, are a very big topic right now. So it was eye-opening to be working on a case study research project with Sun Life Canada, which continues to offer its employees flexibility to choose when they visit the office. They obviously want some office presence, and so they have many initiatives to encourage employees to come into the office, such as philanthropy, where they host monthly on-site events to bring employees together, where they can learn about the work of one partner charity and engage in activity so they can come together and do something, giving employees the chance to connect and network beyond their teams. Another great example was an organization called Lex Machina, which has a dedicated culture club that designs experiences to inject fun in the lives of their hybrid teams. So one of the initiatives they did recently was to send out marshmallows and crackers to everybody to create a virtual campfire. They hired a storyteller and a camp singer, and then all their colleagues were inspired to have their own little fires at home, dial in and kind of have this virtual experience. So during my research, I came across Oliver's 2017 framework, the foundational pillars of social wealth. So she looks at social wealth through three dimensions: relational interest, having others who show genuine interest in our goals, our needs, and concerns; personal expression, where we feel able to express ourselves, foundational to belonging; and solidarity, which emerges through shared interests and values that nurture empathy and connection. This was a turning point for my inquiry, understanding that social wealth isn't measured by volume of connections, but really about that reciprocity and alignment, and also helped me to understand why social media doesn't necessarily help us to feel more connected if we're not feeling these things, if we're on a channel where we can't express ourselves, we're not feeling that solidarity. So I began to get a deeper understanding of social wealth and how that could potentially shift the loneliness narrative away from one of deficit to one of abundance, focusing on the benefits of sustaining deep, meaningful connections, and introducing a language that leaders could potentially resonate with, which could feel desirable and ambitious, and inspire them to put their hands up to get involved. And it did. When we first put this out to the Sun Life leadership community, we had a 52 response rate on our survey, which had 40 questions. It was quite significant, and we were overwhelmed with leaders who wanted to be interviewed on this topic. And while we got incredibly rich data from this 40 question survey, completing this could have consumed around 300 leadership hours. So thinking about work that can be scalable in a professional setting, we need efficient tools. During my research, I did find many tools and concepts along my journey, such as the dual continuum of loneliness and belonging, but I found this to be a bit ambiguous. And I really sought a tool that could help us to understand who needs support and in which part of their life. Something that was intuitive and strengths-based. So inspired by the single item happiness question and social wellbeing theory, I developed a tool, which is here in front of you, called the Social Wealth Continuum, with loneliness on one side, social well-being in the center, and social wealth on the right. And leaders were asked where they are personally and then where they are professionally. And it wasn't just conceptual. I did use this in each of my interviews. And 12 out of 13 of the leaders were immediately able to place themselves on this continuum, most often identifying themselves at different places in their personal versus their professional lives. And after a single follow-up prompt, the 13th leader also could place themselves too. And this kind of showed me that this continuum could reflect a lived truth, something that people could immediately recognize and relate themselves to, albeit being subjective. So this was a mixed methods case study with Sun Life Canada as my corporate research partner. Grounded in a constructivist paradigm. That means my goal wasn't just to extract information from participants, it was really to co-construct meaning with them through dialogue and trust. So I did quantitative, then qualitative, with measures including the Lubin social network scale. So once we got the results in from the quantitative, I had already crafted the qualitative interviews, but that was somewhat refined based on the large scale data that we got from the quant. Okay. So I don't know how much detail you want me to go into in terms of the methodology, but maybe I'll just go on and we can always come to questions about how the methodology was done. Okay, so 12 findings emerged that are both personally resident and organizationally actionable. I'm just going to share a glimpse of the findings with you here today. So finding number one, social needs directly impact social health. So have your social needs changed in recent years? Our social needs are all different and can change from week to week or season to season. Have your social needs changed in recent years? This was the very first question in my interviews. And the result was every single one of them said that their social needs have changed. And this had a significant impact on how socially healthy they felt. So a couple of examples. Participant 2 noticed that she now needs more virtual connection with close friends and less in-person connection than pre-pandemic. In contrast, participant 1 shared that her need for valuable connection is higher now than it was 5 or 10 years ago. So this was due to her life stage change, with children being more independent and her having more capacity. In terms of social needs, here's a metaphor to help you embed this insight. Let's for a moment imagine that me and a male bodybuilder consume the same foods in a day. I feel quite satisfied and don't even think about food between meals, while he feels hungry at multiple times throughout the day. His appetite for food is far greater than mine, and it takes more calories for him to be able to think of anything beyond his stomach. So the same is true for those with a higher need for social connection. They need more interaction every day or every week to feel socially healthy. And this really suggests that the future research should recognize the evolving nature of social needs and support leaders in adapting their social strategies as their environments and priorities change. Key finding two, trusted circles are hyper local. So, despite our globally connected world, 58% of surveyed leaders said they had none or only one out of town friend they feel at ease discussing private matters with. Quantitative data shows that the majority of leaders who participate in groups reserve disclosing private matters with group members. So perhaps their social needs are met elsewhere, and this did come through in the qualitative data. It wasn't that they didn't want to kind of share private matters, they didn't need to. They already had their social network that they kind of went deeper with, but they still wanted to join like social groups and sports groups, particularly. But they didn't need to go any deeper than kind of surface level with the people in these groups. But yeah, this really shows that proximity still matters, even in our digital age. So just building on that, looking at how many people we feel at ease discussing private matters with. And you'll see here the numbers are all incredibly small. So the average number of people we feel at ease discussing private matters with, this is based on the quantitative data of over 1,200 leaders, 2 to 4 local friends, 0 to 2 out of town friends, 1 to 4 professional connections, and 2 to 4 relatives. So most of the most socially resourced leaders weren't necessarily part of clubs, committees, or large social groups, but they had sustained, enduring, close friendships that were often formed years earlier and actively maintained. So perhaps it matters more about who we show up for and how often than how many groups we belong to. Interestingly, in the qualitative interviews, some participants didn't even recognize their friendship groups as groups they belonged to until I pressed them. So, asking them about which groups they belong to, people instantly think civic groups. And actually, when we dove a bit deeper and understood friendship groups, so I guess one of the limitations of this study, we did quant then qual, but perhaps if we did the quant again, I would break that question down to get a better understanding of friendship groups versus civic group participation. Key finding three, communication channels shape connection. So while video calls are a dominant part of remote and hybrid leadership, and a key communication channel for connecting with professional connections outside of work tasks. So even outside work tasks, 49% of leaders still use video to connect with colleagues, but they're less frequently used in our personal lives. So only 25% of leaders use video calls with their out-of-town friends. So rather they would be using text or phone calls. Among family, about 34% use video calls with family and only 15% with local friends. Email is almost obsolete for younger leaders. So leaders between the ages of 25 to 29, only 2% send personal emails, although for over 55s, 18% still do. So this kind of suggests that we might want to reimagine how we communicate, which channels we use to communicate outside of work, to really keep those rhythms of relationships alive outside our physical interactions. And this leads us on to social media use. So here you'll see the passive versus active social media use. So 11% of leaders use social media actively daily, whereas 66% use it passively every single day. Literature suggests that Canadians spend on average 2.5 hours daily on social media. This is lower than the US and other countries, which I think is closer to 3 hours. When asked about its relational impact, 59% said social media had no meaningful effect on their real life connections. So no meaningful effect, yet 60% are using it daily, actively, and passively. Younger leaders are more likely to say it helps them to feel connected, while older leaders found it more distracting or even detrimental to their social health. So the tools exist, but the intention doesn't always. And I think this is just a bit of a wake-up call that if we are on social media, should we be more active? Or is it serving us? Is the time that we're using serving us? Key finding number 4, social wealth is architectural. It doesn't just happen. So the most socially wealthy participants were not necessarily the most networked, but they were most attuned to the relationships that met their current social needs and actively nurtured those relationships. So those leaders with higher levels of social wealth had rhythms of connection. They built rituals, whether that was weekly coffees, shared hobbies, informal check-ins. One leader described a fire pit in their garden where neighbors knew the rules. If the flame was lit, they could drop by without an invitation. Another spoke of bi-monthly dinners with 5 couples, a ritual that had stood for 23 years, hosted an alphabetical order of surnames to help them keep track of who was next. So social wealth, I really found, lives in ritual rhythm and reciprocity, aligned with their social needs, which we know can vary greatly. I've got a couple of examples here. One of them, when speaking about the different groups they belong to, I'd often ask, like, does that group have a name? So one of the participants had her name of the group was her sisterhood group. So she said with that group, they try to group birthdays, so then they get together every second or third month and kind of celebrate all the birthdays that are within that time period. And then they all kind of suggest different activities. So they were just about to do a paint night where they were all getting together in a restaurant where they were going to paint something all together. And they take turns, and not everybody always goes, but that's the same sisterhood group that everybody belongs to. Another one kind of expressed the opposite, that she yearns for a ritual, and she said, I wish I had a better rhythm with my out-of-town friends. We say we'll talk soon, but we don't always follow through. So going into the kind of theoretical support of this, Ozenk and Fajardo in 2021, they demonstrate that thoughtfully designed rituals can reduce emotional distance. They foster psychological safety and reinforce a sense of inclusion. These outcomes are really echoed in my research and also across other research in social wellbeing and community design. So it really can stop the rumination if we have a ritual of connection, even if it's, say, every quarter. It means that when you complete a gathering or you say goodbye to a friend, you understand when you're going to be seeing each other next. You don't need to be thinking about that in the meantime. It also gives you a reason to reconnect. You can always change the date. But if you haven't got one in, then you haven't got necessarily a good reason to reconnect and shift that date if you need to. So in regard to the distinct features that characterize social wealth, so this was one of my objectives. In the context of remote and hybrid people leaders, this was highly nuanced depending on their social needs and their life stage, and their regularity in the office. Some leaders really needed daily social interaction. They would always have something in the diary with a different friend every day. Whereas others, perhaps those who have young children, just having having a weekly get together with a single friend or a group of friends was actually enough outside of work and their home life. Typically, the socially wealthy leaders were part of 2 or 3 close circles and part of 1 or 2 more groups that they possibly only go to surface level with. So maybe that's a sports group or an employee resource group at work. Voluntary roles came up again and again as something that can really build social wealth. And really just a quote there to support this feeling of social wealth. People said they really get me, or I've got a good rhythm of connection. Um, Loneliness is subtle. So 29% of Sun Life leaders reported experiencing loneliness. So this is quite consistent with global averages, but far, far lower than among US remote workers. For some, loneliness was explicitly named, but for others, it really showed up much more quietly. So, a nostalgia for the office atmosphere that no longer exists. Um, uh, One saying that their role is a bit more isolating. Even when they go into the office, it's just the same as if they were at home. They're kind of taking calls in meeting rooms because their team isn't necessarily in that office. Always being the instigator came through strongly in 2 of my interviews as something that leaders tire from. Despite getting appreciation from other group members when they do instigate catch ups, they craved that reciprocity, not just appreciation. These insights really helped me to move beyond lonely or not lonely, to really ask, what does it feel to live in these different relational states? So I did go back to the interview transcripts after really seeing these quiet signs of loneliness to understand all the nuances between those 3 states. Key finding number 6, best friends at work still matter and they can be sustained virtually. So best friends at work are highly valued, even as their form can change. So some leaders who had shifted to having caregiving responsibilities, they were less likely to be going into the office, but actually they were still saying that they had best friends and close friends at work. So they were able to sustain those relationships virtually. You can see the difference here between male and female. Those that have best friends at work are in the teal, and close friends at work are in the coral, and then no best friend at work in the black there. Yeah, I can just see a comment there. People stay in jobs when they have best friends at work. Yeah, absolutely seen this across the research. So it was really intriguing to see how those relationships can be sustained virtually, if indeed they could. And the research was suggesting that they can, although it was very different for different ages. And of course, younger leaders definitely appreciated the more in-office presence to build and sustain those relationships at work. So this leads neatly on to hybrid rhythm matters. So we were able to look at the office attendance in comparison to um, the survey data. And although it wasn't a hugely different, it was quite clear to see that leaders who were in the office 1 to 2 days a week did report the highest social satisfaction. So it's almost like it created that relational equilibrium. So enough contact to feel connected without the overwhelm of full-time in-person presence. So yeah, this really leads to thinking that returning to the office won't necessarily fix loneliness unless it's paired with some intentional opportunities for informal emotional connection. One of the intriguing insights was those who are in the office more the social satisfaction actually went down once you hit like 4 or 5 days. It dropped down. So obviously we couldn't look too deeply into that because that was part of the quantitative data, but that came up in a lot of conversations after the research came through as how interesting that seemed to be. So it did seem to be there was this sweet spot of 1 to 2 days a week. And the word energy came through from a number of the participants in terms of how it feels. So one of them said there's a group of 4 of them, so they always try to go into the office on the same day, but then sometimes it can just be them and there's not a lot of office vibrancy around that. So they appreciated being together in their team, but they did miss the energy of having other people around them as well. And another one who was very comfortable working at home and would be quite happy not going back to the office. She really realized that when she doesn't have in-person days, she doesn't feel as energized to do her work or as healthy. So through all of this, I mentioned the kind of definition of social wealth that I was using early on with participants. Um, um, So I've come up with a new definition of social wealth based on all of my research and conversations with the participants. So my new definition of social wealth, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Social wealth is an internal state that is experienced through the positive activation of one's social network, online or offline, personal or professional. It's a subjective feeling of deep trust, connection, support, and belonging with the individuals and groups in one's life, aligned to one's evolving social needs. So what do we know now that we didn't know before? So this research offers a simple reflective tool, the Social Wealth Continuum, applicable for leaders and organizations to be able to locate where they are today and to seek out strategies to help them get to where they want to go in their personal or professional life. And it helps to reframe loneliness from a stigma to a signal, a cue that something vital is missing. Unlike boredom or hunger, it tells us that we need meaningful connection, something that we might feel when we're surrounded by colleagues, friends, or family if we're not conversing on our goals, our needs, or our concerns. For organizations, the findings highlight that connection must be intentionally designed. For leaders, the study tells us that social wealth is not inherited from past efforts or accidental. It's something that can be intentionally cultivated through rituals, rhythms, and relational designs. This moves us beyond surface level engagement and towards deeper relationships where we feel a reciprocal value exchange. And the research advances the idea, now affirmed by the World Health Organization, that social connection is an essential precondition for health and performance, not a luxury. So what does this mean for remote and hybrid organizations? We now have a greater understanding of the social impacts of remote and hybrid work on social health, and that personal and professional social needs vary by individual and by season. We have a solid base to create an evidence-based intervention program to help leaders move along the proposed social wealth continuum, and a repeatable survey to understand how social connection habits and needs change over time. Findings suggest it's time to start measuring and designing for social health as intentionally as we do for productivity, engagement, and innovation. This means potentially conducting social audits to help teams map their connection, aligned with known averages, and visibly identify the gaps. Offering workshops and training to invite leaders to explore their own placement on the continuum and reflect on where that shows up in their work and their home life. Embedding relational rituals into team rhythms, from weekly connection circles to celebration rituals or shared reflection. Creating third and fourth places like office lounges or casual gathering spaces, virtual spaces like So Work or spatial chat, and even exploring AI-driven prompts to spur intentional connection, not just productivity. And for scholars and future researchers, validating the social wealth continuum across new contexts, roles, and geographies, so beyond leaders. Potentially design intervention programs that can help people to positively move along this continuum, and to deepen research on the impact of relational architecture and its impact on performance, retention, and well-being. So in closing, before the Q&A, I believe that social wealth is really the narrative shift that is needed to help us reach professionals without the stigma of loneliness. Social wealth is ambitious and desirable, and really can help us to inspire positive behaviour changed. It's not enough to be digitally linked. We must feel resourced, trusted, and deeply connected to the people who matter most. Personally, as someone who has led remotely, navigated, international moved, and raised children at a distance from extended family, I've felt what it is like to have strong social capital and still feel deeply disconnected. That social capital is not a guarantee against loneliness. This thesis wasn't just academic, it was personal. It began with a longing of my own and expanded into a collective one. I heard that same longing in the voices of leaders who told me, I don't feel lonely, but I do feel less seen, or I miss the serendipity of connection, or it's always me who reaches out first. My hope is that this work opens up new language, new tools, and most importantly, new permission for leaders to pause and ask, where am I on this continuum? And what would help me to move closer towards the kind of connection I truly want? In the future of work, organizations and leaders will begin to see connection not as a peripheral bonus, but as an essential system to be designed intentionally, skillfully, and generously. Because in the end, social wealth isn't a reward for those who've networked the best, it's a practice. And in this remote and hybrid world, perhaps the most urgent one that we can make. Thank you so much for your time. I will stay on for questions, and I have just got my contact details here. If you would like to connect with me, please take a screenshot. Otherwise, I will stop sharing my screen.
Wonderful. Thanks, Shelley. So we're going to have some questions and discussion now. Feel free to either raise your hand, which you'll find within Zoom under the React button, or alternatively, you can post in the chat, and when we come to you, please unmute yourself to read your question yourself. If you can't, of course, read your question or unmute yourself for any reason, just indicate that in the chat and I'll be happy to read out the question on your behalf. But I see that Kathleen had her hand up a minute ago, so feel free to unmute yourself, Kathleen, and pose a question or a comment.
Hello, Shelley, and thank you, Tristan. I read Robert Putnam's book, Bowling Alone, and he gave me the language to what I'm seeing in our world, which is very sad. I think the loneliness pandemic, there was a conversation when the US Surgeon General in the United States said, we have a problem and loneliness is dangerous. It's like at one point, it's like smoking, sitting was the new smoking when everybody tried to do the campaign with smoking. They're like, okay, if you sit, sitting is bad for you. Being without community is bad for you. So one of the things I was thinking about is my mother. My mother lives alone. She's in rehab right now. That's a whole other long story. But for purposes of our conversation, my mother spends a lot of her time when she was living at home on the phone. And she seemed to do well. That was her engagement, because she's 84, and several of her friends, I would say most of her friends cannot get in a car, take a bus or a train, she lives in Brooklyn, and come see her. So I think that that was her social engagement, but I also believe because my my children will go see her, I will go see her, but not like every day. So I think that affected her health because she got in the last 6 months, I think the arthritis got worse. But I think not having community, because there was a decrease in her health. So I'm
Of
making more of a
course.
statement, but I also would like to hear more of what you want to say about
Yeah.
that.
And I guess there's two things. So one thing is my research was based on professional leaders. So
Mm,
I will speak to this, but I feel like the audience that I've been researching is largely under researched. And I do think loneliness for aging populations is something that's actually very highly researched. And I do think you can find this quite readily. But I think the rituals piece that I came across, this was the most obvious and surprising. I think I even asked the question. I think I even put that in my research design, asking leaders about rituals, but it was so surprising to me how many of them did successfully have rituals of connection, and how that corresponded to their social needs. So for your mum, it sounds like she's having phone calls actually satisfied a lot of her need, but maybe like once every week she needs to know that she's got a physical interaction with somebody. So helping her to understand what her need is, maybe it's once or twice a week, and then helping her to design that. So knowing that, okay, here's your month planner, you're going to see this person then, and helping her to know that, and that can alleviate the negative rumination that can go on in the back of her mind in between times because she knows that physical connection is coming.
mhm.
Is that
Okay.
helpful?
Yes, thank you so much,
You're
Shelley.
welcome. You're welcome.
Right. Well, we've got a comment in the chat from Ian, so we'll go there next and then to Bo afterwards. Ian, would you like to unmute yourself and pose your question?
Sure. Just thinking a lot about the pre and post pandemic office life. And I found some of the things you were talking about with remote work really interesting. One thing I've noticed personally is even before the pandemic, I was at a large company and I would go into the office and then just be on the phone all day for my meetings. I didn't really
Yeah.
interact with anyone in person. And because it was a large company, I was working with people all over the United States and sometimes in other countries. And then, during the pandemic, no difference. So, I didn't know if the size of the company showed any kind of correlation to the size of the company where these leaders were coming from showed any correlation to that level of loneliness. Because, I could say, yes, it felt a little lonely, but it didn't feel any different before or after the pandemic. So I
Mm,
didn't know if that
I
had sort
think
of any correlation.
it had a really big difference whether they were co-located. So Sun Life operates across the whole of Canada. So I think most of them are kind of Toronto, Waterloo way, but then there's some in Calgary, there's some in BC. So it really depended. Some of them might be in Toronto, but actually most of their teams near the Waterloo site. So they would go into the Toronto office mostly, so they wouldn't even be near their team. So I think that really made a difference. Some of the leaders, they would still have really good relationships with past teams who they were in an office location with. So they would make an effort to see those people when they were going to be going into the office. So I think planning ahead is really key. If you're going to make the effort to go into the office, like making sure that some key people are going to be there, or at least letting them know. And I spoke a bit about third places, like making a decision. And when we have got the flexibility, it can be quite hard to motivate ourselves to go into the office a lot of times. So making the decision that you're going to be in on a set day or on set days in a month, and giving people that early heads up, so it will help other people if in the morning they get up and think, shall I go into the office? And they go, well, I know Ian's going to be in on that day. It will make a difference. So, yeah, just finding those rhythms that work for you and can help you to feel more connected. Um, I don't know if that's helpful, Ian. How close are you to your closest office now?
I mean, I'm pretty close now. It's been an interesting shift when the pandemic started, large company, I was working remotely with teams anyway, and so I felt like, oh, remote work on site doesn't make a difference. Since then, I've started working for much smaller companies, and on site does make a difference. It's a
Mm,
smaller, more focused group, more focused culture, and so seeing people and developing those relationships in the office rather than a giant office where I'm not actually on their team anyway made a
mm.
difference, both in terms of personal connection, social wealth, all of that. Um, and so I was wondering if you notice any correlations with the kinds of companies rather than just how the leaders are handling their particular teams.
Yeah, I was only working with one. It was a case study research project with Sun Life Canada, so I can't
Yeah,
speak to
fair enough.
many other organizations. I
Yep.
think something I will say, something a thought that's come to me quite a few times. Robin Dunbar's research came through that it can take 200 hours to turn 200 hours of face-to-face contact to turn a complete stranger into a good friend. And I'm so curious in modern day how that translate when you're, in hybrid. So you are seeing colleagues sometimes and then it's video interaction like that. Do those 2 hours, 200 hours, can they be hybrid hours these days? I don't know. But I know some of the participants, when they were saying about having closer relationships with teams that they used to be in, it was teams that they were in 5 days a week full time. So they've obviously built these much deeper relationships because they did have that face time, albeit them being in their new teams for much longer post pandemic, but they're just not seeing them very often.
It'd be interesting to redo some of that research, wouldn't it, that Robin
Yes.
did? Because some more recent work coming out of psychology indicates that even familiarity can build a positive sense of a relationship with somebody, even if you aren't actually talking or communicating with them whatsoever. And so the role that technology has in maintaining that kind of familiarity would be quite interesting to see how relationships develop, even in the absence of face-to-face communication or even in the absence of any direct, vocal communication of any kind. That familiarity might breed some interesting dynamics.
I was so surprised at the stat about out of town friends that you feel at ease discussing private matters with. The fact that, yeah, for 58% of leaders, it was zero to one out of town friend. And I'm like, I'm the out of town friend. So for like so many of mine, like I'm that for them. Like they might not. So it almost unburdened me in a way to go, I don't need to stay in contact with everybody. It's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go to Bo next. You've got your hand up. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. That was fascinating information and well done presentation. I really appreciate it. And my question actually is about physical space. I know it wasn't mentioned here, but I'm curious your opinion, if you caught anything about that. Like if you change, and this made me think of how to explain it after Ian's question, is after the pandemic, the spaces have remained the same, but the volume of people and what they're going in for has changed. Do you think space has anything to do, or the environment of the space to do with loneliness?
Yes. Yes, definitely. Like no one wants to be in an empty office, but like the thought of third spaces, like you can definitely create those third spaces within office environments. So you don't want to be sat at your desk all the time. And actually, if you're in a third space within the office and people see you there, that's going to be much more inviting in terms of conversation because people might not want to interrupt you at your desk. One of the insights came through from a leader who had come from another organization, and she said they used to just have these I guess third spaces within the organizations, and they always had puzzles there. So you'd go on, you need a bit of headspace, you go and you start like putting a few jigsaw puzzle pieces in, and then inevitably somebody else will come over, and that just really helps to spark conversation with people outside of your team. So yes, I think spaces really, really matter. And I think organizations really need to think about these spaces, especially if the quiet offices are actually hindering people coming in. Like, they need more incentives for employees to want to come in. And like, one of the leaders did mention about the financial cost. Like, it costs a lot of money to go into many of these offices if you're going to have to pay for parking. So having inviting spaces that you know you're going to be having deep connection within and beyond your team, I think will really play an important part in the future of work.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
And it's a really important area that's getting a lot of attention. The term social infrastructure is often used to describe at a community level the kinds of spaces that exist for people to engage in social interaction. Like, the way I think about social infrastructure is it's that enabling environment. It's the physical or the digital space or environment where people can interact. And people, there's now organizations that specialize in going into an organization and helping them to create and to architect the kind of social spaces that really are productive for people to be able to communicate. So I think there's an increasing awareness of this, and it's more than just the architecture, though, of these social spaces. It's also, if you like, the governance, the rules, the policies, the procedures. And there's also an aesthetic component as well. Like you said, Shelley, like, if it's not a pleasant place to be, if you don't feel like being there, then that significantly impacts the demand for the use of those spaces as well. So this is a key part of what we're talking about with building relationships, is actually having the time and the space and the kind of environment that's going to enable those relationships to develop. So move on to the next question. Christy in the chat, unfortunately, she's not in a position to ask the question herself because it's noisy. But she says, I know this is outside your scope, but what thoughts do you have for the global cross-cultural teams? My team and colleagues span the world, and we see each other in person very rarely.
Finding points of reference with each other. So if someone's going to be traveling somewhere, like, the team wants to know this because I'm sure there'll be other members of the team who have traveled to the same place. So finding points of reference outside of work tasks. There's many conversation card sets out there. The one that I absolutely love and I use in a lot of my workshops is I can remember Arthur Aaron's closeness generating game. And it's just a series of 39 questions, which he published in the 90s, and it's lasted the test of time. And it gets you just talking about things beyond work, because that's really what is going to help cross-cultural teams connect when you actually get to know each other on a human-to-human level. Finding rituals to open and close meetings. So one that I love to use is rose, bud, thorn. So rose, something that's happened that you're excited about. Bud, something that's starting to brew. And thorn, a pain in your something that's a concern. So yeah, I really love starting meetings with that, so you get an understanding of how people are arriving in the space. So it doesn't have to be that one. There's many different ways that you can start a meeting, but taking a moment to get present, take a breath, and just come into space and just seeing each other not as just your action list, but as humans.
Because this is something that we can prioritize, but we often don't think about it. But terms like social wealth and relational capital or social capital, all of these kinds of ways of thinking about it can help us to understand how important it is, and then simply use the technology differently than we currently do. Because like you said, we can turn up for a Zoom meeting, we can do the meeting, we can disappear, but then we miss all of the things that normally would happen in person when you're waiting around for the meeting to start, or you're getting the lift up or down from the meeting room before or after, and you're going to the tea room, making, all of those things are opportunities to have those more social, more personal conversations. But technology doesn't immediately facilitate those. We need to use the technology in a way that it allows us to have those meaningful connections. And in order to have those meaningful connections, we need to understand they're valuable and important. And other people need to as well. Otherwise, if you start a meeting with talking about personal things, some people are going to be like, come on, hurry up, let's get on. What are we doing?
Yeah.
But if they understand the value, everyone understands the value, then people will want to do it.
A few of the ways that some of the participants said, one of them started arriving to meetings 5 minutes earlier. And then that allowed him to like have that informal interaction with whoever arrived earlier, but still start on time for those people that actually don't want to go there. Because some people, they're at work, they do just want to focus on their work tasks and they don't have the social need for interaction with colleagues at that level in the workplace. So honoring people's needs as well. Another leader said that after her one-to-ones, she always takes a couple of minutes to write down any personal anecdotes from her direct report. So like one of them mentioned their dog and their dog's name and it was going in for treatment or whatever. So she wrote the dog's name down, and a month later, she doesn't do anything digitally, like you could obviously do this digital. A month later, she would always look back at that note, month before, then she can ask, how is Misty, your dog, doing? And her direct report's like, wow, I can't believe you remembered her name. And she's like, that goes a long way. And yes, she's like helped herself by writing it down. She didn't necessarily remember it, but it helps to build that sense of connection between you. She cared enough to look back, right? So it does matter. So really small things can help.
Yeah, absolutely. And not that we're going to end the session right now, but on that topic, when we do end, I'll finish the recording and then everyone's welcome to stay online a little bit longer for some more informal, more personal kind of discussion as well. Make some connections. We always try and do that in these webinars. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to get them in the chat or to raise your hand. I'd love to talk a little bit about the difference between social capital and social wealth, because all of these terms help to do what we were just talking about, help to prioritize and make us more aware of the value and importance of relationships. But what do you see as the difference between the capital and the wealth?
I almost, and you can definitely correct me on this based on your knowledge, but I almost see social capital as the result of past efforts and social wealth as an internal state based on your present activation of your social capital. So social wealth is more of an emotion, a feeling, whereas social capital is the resource that we have available to us.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much it really matters because both of them talk about and communicate the importance, but I think I'd almost see it as being the opposite in
Ah,
that, like if you think about what the difference between financial capital and financial wealth, um,
mm.
wealth is the accumulated outcomes effectively of the capital. The capital is the productive part that does something that produces a yield or a return, and then the wealth is the accumulation of those
But
outcomes over time.
how socially wealthy you feel is completely subjective. So two of us might have the same amount in our bank account and I'm feeling chuffed. I've been working really hard to get to this point and I'm feeling really socially wealthy. Whereas for you, you normally have way more in your account and you're actually a bit disappointed. So I'm feeling financially wealthy and you're feeling financial lack. So yeah, and this is it, it's all subjective. And I guess it is about the resonance. So as um, I've heard about social capital for some time now. The term itself doesn't do anything for me physiologically. And when I first heard the term social wealth through a researcher named Seth Kaplan, um, I immediately felt something and I thought, yeah, like this is what we need to work towards. It's like reaching for the stars and you're going to fall back to the moon, right? It's like we need to shift that language. And I don't know that for me, social capital does that.
I agree with that, and I think that social wealth is a much more tangible. Like we understand what it means to be wealthy, but we don't necessarily understand what it means to have capital, because we often think about capital as factories and trucks and things that can be productive, of course, that can return yields, but doesn't mean that we're happy. That doesn't mean that we're well off. It just means that the production is occurring. And so perhaps the whole idea and talking about social wealth is something that is going to resonate much more powerfully particularly with individuals.
I just wanted to add what ChatGPT had to say.
Sure.
Social capital, the definition, the networks, trust, norms, and relationships that enable people to work together and access resources, focus, connections, and relationships. Example, having mentors who guide your career, belonging to a professional network that shares opportunities, a neighborhood where people trust each other. That's what they have for social capital. For social wealth, they have the collective well-being and prosperity created through strong social connections, fairness and inclusion, focus, outcomes of social capital, examples, a community with high levels of equity, safety, and belonging, an organization where culture fosters inclusion, collaboration, and shared success, and families or societies that thrive because people's social, emotional, and economic needs are met.
Thank you, ChatGPT.
I will say that when you ask ChatGPT questions about social capital, quite often you get pretty much gibberish, because there's so much diversity in the ways in which social capital is defined. So it can be quite a challenge. But it does seem like a fairly useful distinction to think about the capital as the thing that's productive and the wealth as the state of being, the accumulated benefit that you have, that, like you said, Shelley, like that feeling of wellness, that feeling of solidarity, that feeling of belonging. That's the result of the productive capital that yields that return over time, and it's that accumulated yield perhaps is the wealth. So perhaps there isn't really much difference between them at all, and it's just different ways of communicating the same thing. At the end of the day, we're saying, look, relationships are really, really important. They're really valuable, and we need to foster them and to have more of them in our lives. We need less isolation.
But we don't necessarily need more of them. We just need to go deeper with the ones that we have, because those numbers, I think, were surprisingly low, bearing in mind we were speaking to professional leaders, and I think refreshingly low. And I think if we move away from the idea of quantity, 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 then we can actually really start to nurture the relationships that matter most.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of people think, the good networking is getting a lot of business cards and a lot of superficial connections. But those superficial connections don't give us the wealth that we're talking about. They don't help us to feel connected and belonging and that solidarity. So in many ways, it is more about those meaningful connections and not just purely about the sheer number, which is what we often talk about.
But then, like the friendship piece, like the enduring friendship groups, like finding systems with those groups. So we want to really nurture the people that matter most close to us, but we don't want to forget those groups that we've invested a lot of time and energy in. So it's about how do we kind of how do we set up our relational ecosystem in a way that we can nurture that group in a way that's going to be satisfactory to both of us within the limitations of our lives?
Yeah, precisely. So does anybody have any other questions? If you do, make sure you get them in quickly. Otherwise, we'll look to wrap up the session shortly. So as I mentioned, when we do finish, I'll stop the recording, and feel free to stay online just for a couple of extra minutes if you want to have some informal interaction and some of exactly what we were talking about.
Thanks, Tristan.
I'm just curious, are you focused more on the professional workplace, or I guess that would be two extreme different research if you went to personal versus professional?
So we did both. So very much it was holistic. So I was speaking to professionals, but looking at their personal life and their professional life. So yeah, the research was very, very much looking at both. And most oftentimes, those who are socially wealthy in the workplace were somewhat lacking in their personal life. And one of them, like she had a realization during it that she's been almost hiding behind busy, and she's got a very well networked at work, and actually her personal connections, they just expect that if they don't hear from her, it's because she's busy at work. And she realized that she needs to kind of find that balance.
Mhm. Okay, I have another question. Where are you going with this research? Do you find that you need more research now, or are you going to expand? Where are you going with
Yeah.
this?
Good question. So there's a few different ways. I have developed a kind of an intervention program for professionals, which I have scientifically validated now. It's still kind of going through the evaluation stage, but it does stand up. So looking to build out that program and test it with a wider number of users. Also, I'm really wanting to empower like HR and internal comms leaders with this knowledge so they can support their workforces in a way. So yeah, running something of a program to really inform them of all of this knowledge, and then developing assets that they are able to use to help support the social health and wealth of their remote and hybrid workforce.
Great. Such great conversation and discussions we've had. So it doesn't seem like there's any other questions. So Shelley, thanks very much for taking the time and effort to give this webinar. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tristan, so much for hosting.
My pleasure. And for everyone else, we've got our next webinar is next Wednesday. It's going to be by Rob Schneider, and he's going to be talking about social capital and its influences on career aspirations and attainment for traditionally underrepresented students. So I'll stop the recording now, and as I mentioned, feel free to stay online a little longer if you want some informal discussion and interaction.